What's going on, Soul Tribe? And welcome to Alchemist Astrology. Justin here, and are you ready to get into those lunar shenanigans? Because you know what? This is one of those times. We got with this big pile up in Capricorn. It's like this. The moon has these like real kind of notable, like it's quiet and then it's just active, and we have a couple of those. I think the first one is going to be definitely a bit. It should hopefully be a bit easier than the second one's going to be. That one's giving more tenser kind of vibe. Similar energy, I almost think, to like the full moon that we just had. And man, what a moon that was. That's something else. But we'll get into all that here in a moment. But if you're new here, again, my name is Justin, and one of the things that I do in this channel is talk about the lunar shenanigans, which just goes over the astrology of the moon, what sign it's in, what phase it's in, when it happens to be going void of course, and just to get a general feel of the energies each week as the moon is making these different connections with the other celestial bodies, and just seeing how that is just affecting the body and just we the people, because that's what the moon is really kind of closely associated with. So, but before we jump into that, if you want to support the work that I'm doing further, down in the description box, there's a link for my Patreon page there. And there are a couple tiers on that page. One of them will give you access to the Lucky Day podcast, which is a monthly show that just talks about the most auspicious dates for each month for whatever endeavor that you're wanting to initiate. And then the second tier will give you access to that, plus a personalized monthly transit report from me. So if that's something that you're interested in, definitely check that out. Check that out down there. But let's go ahead and get into this thing here, because look at that last quarter moon. We're going to get into the week of January 6th through the 12th, 2026, and let's jump into it here, because we start off with the moon still kind of in that void of course phase on the 6th of January. And yeah, before the moon moves into Virgo, something just kind of, take into account, how was that period of time? How did you notice the energy? I definitely took it, but, as a period, like the moon in Leo is typically, that's my first house. So I just kind of kicked it. I didn't do anything. I just kind of lounged around and yeah, just kind of just sort of, I allowed the moon. I was going to do some videos, but the moon was like, why? There's, this, I'm void of course. And I'm like, what? I respect that moon. So, yeah, but, it's something interesting to think about, like how infrequent that is, where, the moon's always talking with something within at least, a 13-degree span, but to go a 30-degree span, without not having any conversations, that's really crazy, that the moon was just like averse to everyone, while it was going through that little pocket there. So it'll finish up that kind of time in Leo, and then it'll move from Leo into Virgo at about 8:56 a.m. Pacific time. And if you're looking at the video here, I have that chart up here. And I think just as an energy, just in general, just as a signifier, the moon in Virgo is ruled by is ruled by Mercury, and is the mutable earth sign. It's nocturnal, so it's receptive or kind of like internal in nature. And Virgo has this, I think, is a very, very practical energy. Like I feel like most of the earth signs are. But particularly in Virgo, there's this efficiency. There is this, you go to Virgo to find the answers to things. They're going to be the problem solvers. They're going to have that to be able to pick apart to see the many facets of things and just figure out how to work. Very tactile, sort of just technicians, or tacticians. That's what I think about sort of like as the Virgo frequency sometimes. And I think that this is a great one to just sort of look at what things are working for the body, especially with the moon in this waning phase. There was this, I think it was in Dorotheus, I remember reading, where he was saying that if you wanted to tear down a house or demolish a house, to do when the moon is waning. So this could be looking at things that aren't working for the body, looking at maybe possessions, moon stuff that happen to be holding you down. Maybe it's like, why do I have this, like all these copies of books? Or, what am I doing with like 2 TVs? Maybe I can just have one, or maybe or whatever that happens to be. Why do I have this excess of these things? Maybe it's time to clean out the closet. Maybe it's maybe it's time to clean out the fridge, whatever that's looking like. But this is, I think, a great time to get things in order, to get things you're feeling just like it's moving in an efficient just like orderly manner. I think it's a really kind of good sort of Virgo thing. But just kind of looking at the lay of the land, this is a busy one for the moon because it's going to have conversations with all of the celestial bodies. The moon went from saying like not talking with anybody, and now it's just like, hey, moon here, and I've missed you all. And let's go ahead and get into that next one here, because when we get to the 7th of January, like I said, this is a jam-packed one. The moon officially ends its void of course at about 12:01 a.m. Pacific time at about 8 degrees and 26 minutes of Virgo, where it'll form its first trine with Mercury. And like I said, the moon's feeling chatty, because here when we're talking about the trines, this is when the celestial bodies are 120 degrees apart from one another. They're these like elements, so there's this understanding of one another. And the trine was related to Jupiter, so there's this ease, this flow, this beneficence that comes the most positive aspect. And so this can be just a great time for just getting maybe just kind of grounded in the body. This could be where if the mind has been kind of scattered, it can be a great time to get things in order, doing like a journal, doing some things that just help ease that kind of mental energy up. This could be, this would be a great time to do some sort of like material planning. Maybe you want to save up for a home, or maybe you want to save up for a car. Maybe you want to save up for some kind of trip, and maybe you want to, maybe whatever this may be that you're trying to do. This could be just that really kind of good inspirational time. I think the moon trine the sun is another one, like especially if you haven't been feeling in order, to get yourself back in order, find ways to get grounded, find ways to have that good kind of head or the kind of mind-body connection, in a sense. Like let's get a grip back on the reins again. There's the energies are easing up a little bit. Now I can moon trine Venus, just kind of take care of the things that I love, take care of the things that matter to me. Maybe haven't had a chance to connect with some people in a little while. This could be making that sort of conversation, whatever it happens to be. But I like this all of this ease that's coming there. Now it doesn't take away from the fact, we're easing away from something. We're looking at where the discomfort is, that moon trine Mars, and we're putting energy behind that. We're trying to take whatever actionable steps we can to remove ourselves from this, and that Mars is giving that oomph, where it's taking that, where that challenge doesn't have to feel so overwhelming, or where it doesn't feel like, where it's less of a, where we're being forced into a situation, whereas a moon trine would be like we're forcing the situation. We're making the things happen, as opposed to, like I want to get in shape, as opposed to my doctor told me I need to get in shape. That's a big difference in how you approach that. But however it's going, both are leading to good results. That moon sextiling Jupiter is trying to get to that sense of good, trusting that there's going to get the results that I want at the end of this, that there's going to be more to work with than when I started this thing. It's going to unlock some new sort of stuff there. So I kind of like this. I kind of like this day. If it's going to be busy, this just feels like it's like maybe just noticing that the energies are just coming back in other people, just like people just feeling like more just kind of active again, just more kind of busy. This could see where you're seeing again maybe a lot of people traveling that day possibly there. So but just something I think to kind of pay attention to on this one. But let's go ahead and get into the next day here, because it's kind of an interesting contrast. We get to the 8th of January, and we just had all of that energy happening, but then the moon, before it moves into Libra, moves into this opposition with Saturn. I had a number of thoughts with this one. Now, on a personal level, I think, whenever you have any celestial body, but when you have like a moon opposing a malefic, or, and we're opposing Saturn, oppositions are the most difficult aspects. They're when the celestial bodies are in opposite signs. At the time, it would be moon in Virgo, Saturn in Pisces. And oppositions are adverse. They're Saturnian in nature. And so where we can have, let's say, those moments of inspiration, those moments of ease. It's like Saturn's reminding us that okay, but how are you going to keep this inspiration? Because how are you going to make that sustainable? How are you going to make it long lasting? Because there's going to be periods of time that'll still challenge you. You'll still have whatever is going on in your family, whatever is going on with your resources, whatever going on in your relationships, with your home, your country, whatever that's going, physically, personally. You're still going to have all of those things that are getting in your way, and you only have so much time to do them in, and I think that Saturn, not necessarily just always trying to be a wet blanket. I think that's been something in particular in Pisces that Saturn really kind of taken comfort with, but I don't think that's always has to be the case, that Saturn's trying to do that. But I think that, Saturn is that discipline aspect of things, that there are going to be times where the body feels sluggish, where the body is not feeling motivated, when it's feeling sick. The malefics can just represent just illness. There are going to be times where where you get injured, where you fall, whatever that is. And, how are you going to keep whatever it is, how do you keep the motivation for that thing and not get totally derailed in whatever it is that you're, whatever it is that's going on, not just, maybe even just like current endeavors, but just getting derailed in just life. You know what I mean? So, moon opposition Saturns can be tough, but they, and I think that's one where knowing the nice thing kind of with these kind of lunar transits is that they're not forever, that they can be just these sort of temporary things, because after the moon moves, has this conversation with Saturn, then it's going to move into Libra at about 4:05 p.m. Pacific time. And now when you look at the lay of the land, first off, now the moon moves out of view of Saturn. We're not thinking about Saturn anymore, but we are thinking about these series of squares that are getting ready to happen on either side of the moon, because we got all these planets in we got what's that, 4 planets in the sun, all in cardinal energy. So this is going to be another one of those little busy pockets, but it's not going to be like how that one where it was like Trine Town. Now we're in Square Plaza. I had something more clever for that. and that's what it can lead us to, where we thought we had something for this and maybe we don't. But the moon in Libra, just in general, Libra is a benefic ruled sign. It's ruled by Venus, so we love that. It's a cardinal air sign. It's one of the diurnal signs, so more active in nature. And moon in Libra, I think, is that one that is trying to find, to find that sense of balance. That is a great time for communicating, for getting out there and talking with people, for, again, whether that be with family, with friends, whatever that's looking like. I think Venus and Libra want to create this sense of harmony, this sense of balance, this sense of laughter and joy. I think music is a great way of working with things that, when we're in Libra energy, doing some things with the, appreciating the arts, appreciating nature. Nature's an easy one. I'm constantly looking at the sky and just like, no matter what it's doing, it's something, unless it's just like just plain gray out and just literally, maybe that might be the one instance where there's nothing happening. But I'm even looking at like right now and just like this, it's just all these blues, whites, and grays. It's just like this really lovely combination, and that can sometimes inspire the mind in a way, and I think that's something to think about with Libra, being the initiators of thought, of air, where that idea first creates itself. So, Venus, its ruler is in, it's in weird shape, it's under the beams of the sun. It's still within a degree, it's within a degree of Mars. Venus is in an interesting place, we're talking about that, but yeah, just as a whole, I think that this can be one to, just enjoy find some things to laugh at. I think that even in a tough time, sometimes laughter can at least just sort of break up. You can give that moment of pause so that you can just kind of like, okay, let me reorient myself and figure out, okay, what am I doing with this? Like, okay, like that happened, so let's see what's getting ready to come. So, but yeah, that's pretty much the 8th there. We're generally kind of like a mixed bag. I think one more thing that I wanted to mention with the moon opposing Saturn, I think Saturn is one where there was all that kind of goodness or that ease that seemed like it was being offered in that on the 7th. And to me, it can also give this, I think moon opposite Saturn can give this idea, like again, like I mentioned, like what's sustainable, like where it's like, are we thinking about the kind of long-term consequences to things? Are we doing this like putting band-aids on things as opposed to like getting actual treatment? Like that's what this thing, or like, kind of taking the Tylenol, kind of making the pain durable, but like, okay, like we're getting temporary relief, but eventually, that's not going to work. And then it's, in that time we've given a time for something to kind of fester. So, that's something I think to think about with this moon opposition with Saturn. There's just something even I think a little deceptive about it. Saturn can be about ways of concealing stuff. Saturn can be hard to read. I think I'm thinking of like just as a placement, like I know a couple people with Saturn in the first house. And if I didn't know them as well as I do, like they are really hard to read. Like they don't give a lot. It's something that you have to know them to get underneath that Saturnian sort of guard. And so it's really, I think there's something there that's like a saying one thing and then meaning another, concealing something like that. So that's just another thing that I've been thinking about with that. So just a little sidebar there. And then, that maybe might be a main bar here in a minute, because then we get to the 9th, which of January, and now the moon, the moon's going to square Mercury, of the first of these series of squares. And this is, the squares are, again, a hard aspect like the opposition is when the celestial bodies are 90 degrees apart from one another. I have the moon squared Mercury appears happening at 12 degrees and 39 minutes. And there's some kind of tension there. There's something that's changing, something that's happening there, maybe in your city. This could be in your family, your home, maybe just in your body. And there's some sort of like, there's a mental strife with that. There's some kind of, and as you see here, if you're looking at the chart, that Mercury-Mars conjunction is starting to get closer and closer. So still within 7 degrees right now, but there's something that's maybe brewing. Something that we're seeing maybe with all these Kazimis that are, all these conjunctions that are happening. Some new stuff is forming. We're not quite sure what that means yet. And that's interesting that the moon is now starting to square this stuff as these conjunctions are starting to separate and get tighter. It's like it's yeah, very fascinating, I think, what's kind of building up here. And so there could be some sort of like news that's happening, maybe something even just like in like the economy, something with just like banking, maybe that, that the moon is seeing some sort of like square, they're trying to figure out that, or, something with just like aid, something where there's some kind of like reversal, that's happening. We're just trying to make sense of that. Typically a moon, Mercury square can be just like, the mind and the, what we're thinking is not lining up, and we can know, we feel that in the body, and there's just like that sense of misunderstanding and confusion. And let's get to the next one, because we get to the 10th of January, and this is where like the energy is really kind of peaking here, but it's nothing but squares. Normally when we talk about like squares, especially with the benefics, it's better to have an aspect with the benefics than nothing at all. But there are times, when I would read different, especially in like ancient texts, I'm thinking of like Valens and things, especially that's been one I've been mainly reading as of late. And, you'll have these entries that'll talk about these moments where the benefics aren't always benefic, and it's not necessarily that they're doing bad things. It's usually some sort of reversal. It's like that squandering, having something, not realizing how good something was or how much you went to count on something until it was gone. And then it's just like, oh crap, now what? And that's what I think that moon is squaring Jupiter, something you've trusted in as a consistent thing. Now we're maybe needed to initiate something new, because there's a lot of cardinal energy, a lot of stuff that's trying to happen here. And I think I would be really kind of not necessarily cautious, but just like wary about how I'm initiating right now. Because I think the cardinal ones can be very quick to do things. And that's what we love cardinal energy for. Just like, if we need something or someone to initiate something, I want someone with some cardinals. They're going to get the ball rolling. But it's just like, what are they going to do after that ball's rolling? Like, then it's like, oh, well, on to the next one. It's just like, oh no, but we got to deal with that mess that's getting ready to form there. And so, because there's something with that moon squaring Mars, that's going to be the toughest aspect of this little square party. And that's, again, hard aspects with the malefics. This is like Mars taking away something. There was that threat to it, and now Mars is like, yep, it's gone. It's gone, no more. And it's something that doesn't seem, and it's like maybe it's not being witnessed as a big deal in the moment, just because it seems like with all these planets under the beams. But I think it's like, especially as they start, when we have them getting from out under the beams, I think we'll really start seeing some of the sort of like consequences of whatever has been kind of building up over this. January is an interesting month to watch. Because I think there's just a lot of things that are happening here, especially in this pocket, that are really kind of setting the tone. And that moon squared sun, I think that can be a very unsettling feeling, like the mind body being at odds, and even, thinking about the sun representing the king, the moon representing the gatherings of people, or even just like the queen. It's like, the sun's making move, and how do I respond to them? Maybe you have a partner that's making moves, and you're just like, oh, I don't know if I'm quite ready for that. Like we may be at kind of like odds there. And then that leads to that moon squaring Venus, where it's just like, now we're making moves, and now that's going to affect certain relationships, for better or for worse, depending on what's going on there. Just depending on how much of a say Mars, I think, has in this. But yeah, this is a really kind of interesting day, this second pocket, that ninth building up to the 10th there, just when the moon moves into Libra. So this is another little pocket there that I would keep an eye on for sure, as we're kind of moving through this week. And something I think to keep in mind of as well, that when before I get into that, even though that I'm talking about this, and there's a lot of stuff that's maybe collectively that's maybe kind of happening there, that doesn't mean it's all just like harsh things that are just challenges that are happening. This could be a really dope period for some time, maybe some ease if you got a lot of like earth play, maybe you got a lot of Scorpio, and you got a lot of Pisces there, and you got all these stuff going through Capricorn. It's like, yes. maybe not with Pisces, with Saturn being there, but with like maybe like Scorpio placements, for example. This one wouldn't be too bad. You got Jupiter overcoming, whatever Scorpio is for your chart. You got Scorpio, you got, Jupiter overcoming there, Saturn's in a trine there, Mars is in a sextile there, Venus there. So it's like there could be some ease that is going on, and I think that it's always something to pay attention to what's going on in your chart. Because this could be where you're like, Justin, but I'm in chill town. And I'm kind of right there with you right now. There's not a whole lot going, like. Capricorn is like, yeah, there was a lot that was opposing my sun, with that, especially I'm looking at Mars and Venus, but it's not been too crazy, just like more sort of internal things. I got sun in the 12th house, more sort of personal things that I've been been dealing with, but nothing like when this little cha-cha goes into Aquarius, I got eyes on that. And that's something too that helps you get prepared for this stuff. And I think that it's just even helps just when you see certain aspects kind of like coming up in, let's say there's like world events and things. It's just like, oh, that's what that's about. And very interesting. We'll talk about that in the reflections. But then we get to the 11th of January. And, after all of that, after that, all the scales being thrown to and fro, we're going to get out of that. We're going to get out of that, and we're going to have some feelings about it, because we're going to move into Scorpio. Moon moves into Scorpio at about 2:55 a.m. Pacific time. And, the moon in Scorpio, we're in a malefic ruled sign now of Mars. Scorpio is the fixed water sign, and they're one of the nocturnal signs, so more receptive in nature. And this is where the moon does find itself in its fall. When we're talking about with the moon. And when you have a celestial body in its fall, that's like where in its exaltation, the Taurus is being raised up, but in Scorpio is being hindered in some sort of way. It's being brought down to it's having a harder time. It's not that the moon can't do anything, but it's having a hard time doing its significators. Because the moon. I've been thinking about this with how the sun, is different. How the sun's exalted in Mars's sign and actually finds its fall in Venus's sign, and then it's the reverse with the moon. I think it's, partway why the moon maybe struggles so much with that is that it's answering to Mars, and Mars is one that, signifies all the things that are harmful to the moon. Some things, when you think about the violence and the aggression, the things that, especially when those things are held in the body and the moon's not able to move through that. When you think about when you think about just like, I think about the functions of Mars and how it can signify in the body, like the excretion of things. And like, if you hold those things in, like, it's uncomfortable when you don't, go to the restroom, for example. That's a different type of pain. Like those are things that are real kind of harmful for the moon, and I think just in a body sense. But even like having those maybe sort of intense attachments. I think something with the fixed signs is that there can be this hard, and not just Scorpio, just with all the fixed signs. There's this element of change. I think is hard. I think that fixed signs like consistency. They can change, but they want to do it at their own pace. Like it's different. And I think that just maybe sometimes that moon in Scorpio could just get overly attached to certain things. It can have these bonds, and it needs to be able to release these things, to be able to move through these, sort of, especially if we're talking like emotions here, these deep feelings, and, especially if there are things that are harmful to us or to our bodies and things like that. So, this could be looking at ways, again, with the moon waning, what are some things that you can cut out, that you can remove to make space for something new to fill in, and that space that the moon in Scorpio can bring. But moon and Scorpio in general can just be more of just a bit of more of a difficult period. This is one that I usually look out for just because I have a lot of fixed placements. So, yeah, and this is one where, especially if you have like a lot of Scorpio, Aquarius, Taurus, or Leo, it's something to just kind of pay attention to there. But it's a tricky place for the moon to be, But there is this kind of nice support. It's got reception with its ruler. It's got this overcoming. So this one in particular, I think, especially since Jupiter's been in Cancer, I think that's at least helped lighten up the moon's experiences in Scorpio. But looking at the kind of lay of the land here, this is one where the moon again is going to be talking with everybody. We have all this just receptive energy between the moon, Saturn, and Jupiter being in water signs, and the rest being in earth signs here. So the moon's going to be forming these series of sextiles that are going to be happening, similar to how this Capricorn party is going to be doing that with Saturn. So that's, really kind of interesting to observe. But yeah, let's talk about this last day here, because we get to the 12th of January. And like I said, the moon's going to form a sextile with Mercury. And so now we had this period of time where all that, whatever happened up during that period of moon in Libra, now there's an opportunity to, okay, with that information that I just got, how am I going to move? Where do I need to... what experts maybe do I need to talk to with? Maybe there was something that was, revealed, whatever this could be. Maybe with those squares, maybe there was something happening in your home space, and now you're like, oh crap, I'm going to need to find like a carpenter or like a plumber or something along those lines, or, look into someone who can maybe help teach me those things, whatever that is. If we're, looking where, if the finances are looking a little strained, but yeah, I find moon sextiling Mercury, and this is when the celestial bodies are 60 degrees apart, as you can see here. If you're looking at the chart, I have the moon sextile Mars up here. But they're in that sort of like those like the sort of like not being both nocturnal signs. When we're talking about Mars, or talk about Scorpio and Capricorn, we're talking about those kind of commonalities there. yeah, that's where we're seeing that connection there. And the sextiles, they're weaker than the trines, but with a little bit of initiative, they can still create these opportunities there. So whatever good that you're trying to get started there with that moon trine Jupiter, moon trine Jupiter, that's always really nice. We like a moon trine Jupiter that's a little bit of a break. Even if it's in the Scorpio section, the moon's still feeling, I think, that pressure from Scorpio, in that energy. But again, with Jupiter being there, it's like, okay, yeah, you got that, but I can take that as a motivator as opposed to something that's crippling me. And then the moon sextiling Mars is that, I think, again, that initiative where it's like, okay, yeah, I like the idea of this. It's going to take some work, with whatever it is that maybe we're initiating, but now it's doable, with that sextile Mars, with some effort, and maybe probably with some help. We may need to call on somebody with that moon trine Jupiter, where it's like, it's just like, oh, if we just took the moment and a minute and asked with the moon's asked someone with the moon sextiling Mercury, then they can create, if not create the opportunity for us, maybe find someone or the thing that we're looking for that can, and then kind of help ease whatever that Marshall thing is. So some very interesting stuff as we kind of move through this weekend. I'm going to go ahead and switch back over. Yeah, some very interesting stuff as we move through this week. This is going to be another one where it's like the moon will have all this kind of busyness just sort of back to back, and then it's going to go void of course again. And we're going to talk about that in two separate periods. So I think one happens on the 13th, and then the second one, and the last one until about August time happens around, I think, on the 18th of January. So yes, this week in particular is doing a lot. Since the full moon, because that's something where I wanted to take a minute and talk about just like how fascinating astrologically those sort of stuff happen, because something similar happened, I remember, a couple months back, and it was a similar moon Mars conjunction. So I don't know how closely any of you, like I get emails and things that'll give me just like sort of like the news kind of highlights for some things that where, if there's certain stories that I find myself interested in, I'll do more further, kind of looks into, but just to get a general overview. I have one that I'm subscribed to right now that'll just give me that. And right around the full moon, there was that whole stuff that, I'm saying here in America, there was that whole stuff that was going on with Venezuela. It was like right after the full moon, I remember reading that it said a couple hours later, all of that had went down, and that it had led to that capture. And I was like, how crazy that it would go from the moon opposing the sun, which the sun can represent to the leader, to the moon opposing Mars. And that would have been within about an hour or so of that, of that whole instance that was going on. So that to me was just really kind of startling astrology. And it's like, when you follow those things, you start to see those repetitions. You can see it in the larger swaths of things, but you can even, you track them enough, you can even start seeing them even when we're talking about moon, the moon doing things, even as fast as the moon can be. Because yeah, I just thought that was just, the timing of it was just really impressive, and I think that's something to just like, of one instance. And then on a personal instance, I remember I was just like, I think it was Sunday. The moon was in Taurus, and I'm pretty sure it was either Saturday or Sunday, and I was just like, no, it couldn't have been Sunday. No, this would have been, oh goodness. No, it would have been Sunday because the moon was in Leo then. The moon went to, I could not get motivated for just the life of me to get anything started or recorded or anything along those lines. And then the moon was squaring I got a little update from my calendar that the moon was, exactly squaring my midheaven. And I was just like, You were absolutely right, Moon. I am not trying to do. I'm having the hardest time. I barely worked out, and so I thought that was interesting. And I was just like, how much work do I have to do today? I'm like, what's my time limit on when this video has to get out? And you know what? It didn't have to be out until later today when I'm recording this. So I'm like, you know what? Bet, bet. And that's perfect. So, like it's really cool, especially when you start tracking this stuff enough to see how these instances are popping up and then see how they differ each time. Like when I talk about like Moon and Scorpio, there's sometimes where the Moon in Scorpio is like it's meh, like and then there are other times where it's not great, and there are other times where I'm like, okay, that wasn't too bad. Like, you know what, that was a useful one. I kind of needed that one, but it depends. There are usually other things that are going on, and so that really just kind of helps you just get grounded in the experiences of it all and to really just kind of document and live in your life in a way that I think is fascinating. I think it's fascinating, and it shows where you can, create more tensions and, or create more opportunities and things like that. So just those are my kind of personal reflections over this week. And yeah, I think overall it's been a bit of a mixed bag. A bit of a mixed bag. I definitely ended up like sort of, thankfully I didn't get like, I noticed that I was like starting to try to get something, but it's like it came and went so easy. Stayed hydrated, and all that good stuff. A lot of tea, a lot of time, steams. So that was like honestly a lot of my week, just staying up top of just like more so kind of personal health and things like that. But also just being reminded too, just of like little steps and things, the ways that I've grown as like an herbalist, for example, and all sorts of neat things that I've been just kind of thinking about there. But yeah, this one was a fascinating week. Some personal declarations that have been made. Some things that is just like, I'm tired of feeling this. Or I don't want this in my life. How come I tend to do this? And it's like, okay, you know what? Let's not just do less of that. Let's get back to where let's get back to that. So, and I had a big thing kind of like in my zodiacal releasing that's happening that I've been kind of watching for a while. And it's like the fact that it's here, it's like, it's funny how it came, but again, one of those timing things. It was like, it's been really wild. It's been really, really wild to just kind of watch that. So, but if that's something that you want to do, get more familiar with your clock, see what's going on in your transits and release things and all those good kind of timing techniques. Down in the description box, there's a link to book a consultation with me if you have any questions about the services. No, any questions about the services that I offer. You can email me. I'm more articulate and at least I hope I'm more articulate in email. At least I read it over a couple times before I send it. so that's nice. But so there's that. And I also have all the Lunar Shenanigans in a playlist, but also too, if you wanted to see what's going on, just like what's happening with like the sun and the other planets and get a better idea of like what that's looking like, from outside from the view of the moon, then you can go over to the Celestial News Monthly tab that has all the videos there for month by month for all of that. And then there is this series of videos, I'm starting to get back on those. I just released a Mercury one the other day. I'm about to do another Mercury one here. Well, I'm going to release I think a Saturn one, and then I have another Mercury one I'm about to record here soon. But I have these videos talking about different celestial bodies and different zodiac signs in different houses, and some ways to think about them when you're approaching your chart. And I should probably make a little mention. I mentioned this in the videos, but when I'm doing these things, it's all from whole sign houses. So if that's something, if you work with Placidus, that may be just a thing that you'll have to maybe just explore. You don't have to, explore, see how you feel about it, see how that compares in your life. And, because I started off with Placidus. So I think it's just, just something to think about, but that's available for you. So I think that's all I got there. But until next time, stay mindful out there. Keep eyes on that moon. I've been able to sort of get the moon. Like it's been really foggy over here. Foggy or cloudy, so I'll just like get like little bits of the moon. Catch the moon when you can. And I will catch you. I'll catch you on the next one. Later.